Okay, so we're at 106B2. We're at the it's in the Gemara, it's about a third of the way down next to Tosfos Ked Amar Rava. So Rava said, so Ha'ola Ola Rishona, Ha'chanami Kesef Rishon. Okay, so we're talking about different monies from but we got into this by the Dayanim, certain Dayanim, and certain people who fix this Sofrim who fix the Sifrei Torah, and certain people who taught the Kohanim how to shacht and how to do certain avodas, like the kmitza, taking with the three fingers the flour and all those things. They got paid, and making the ketores, making the lachem b'chanim, they got paid from the money. But so we were talking about specifically, there are some separate monies. So the half shekels that people gave, so that was given, we read it right before Rosh Chodesh Adar. It's now to this day, Parsha Shkalim, to remind people because it has to be given by Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So all the korbanos, the communal korbanos were bought with those half shekels that were paid by Nisan, and they had to be paid, that it would have to be bought with that year's korban. So some of the stuff that we're talking about here is paid with the stuff that's left over at the end of the year. After they don't have to pay to buy any more korbanos with this money, some of this money is spent with this. So we're going to talk about more stuff. What's get paid with this money? What are some of this other monies? So Mesave, they asked against Rav, who said certain money was taken from the Beis Hamikdash's the money from the Beis Hamikdash. Mesave. Haktaras v'chol korbanos tzibor bo mitruma hasalishka. The ketoras, the incense, and all communal korbanos were bought with money and brought from the truma of the office of the Beis Hamikdash. Mizbeach hazav v'levonach lechoshes, the golden altar, spices for that, and vessels for the Beis Hamikdash. Boin mimoser nasachim. They come out of extra money of the wine libations. The Gemara is going to talk about that in a minute, so just hold on to see what that is. Actually, no. So Rashi says it's machlokas and menachos. Reb Chia bar Yosef says that they would fill up a container with a heaping, meaning it was over the top. It filled up more than the top of the container. They would take a flat thing and knock off the extra flour, and they would sell that extra flour. And even though Nesachem literally means the wines, but the Menachos and Nesachem are similar, that they weren't brought in the midbar. We read about it a couple weeks ago in Parshas Shlach. So that was, according to Rabbi Chia bar Yosef, what the extra of the Nesachim are. And Rabbi Yochanan says that they buy in bulk, and if the price changes, they always get a better deal. So let's say if they paid $3 per if the contract was for $4 per kilo, whatever, and the price went down to 3, then they only have to pay 3. So with the extra money that they didn't have to pay, that's the extra. So whatever it is, so the Mizbeach Hazav and the special Lavona for that goes on the Lachem Apanim. Meaning, what's the difference between the Ketores that we mentioned in the previous sentence and the Lavona? Ketores is the Kohanim bring that on the Mizbeach, and the Lavona went on the Lachem Apanim, on the showbread every Shabbos. Mizbeach Ola, the Mizbeach that the Korbanos were bought on, the copper Ola that was in the courtyard, not under the roof. The golden Mizbeach that the incense was brought on was under the roof in the Beis Hamikdash. The Lishkos and Azaros, the offices, different rooms of the Beis Hamikdash. In the courtyards, boin mikache bedek habayis. Those go from the bedek habayis uh things that people donated, if they donate the value of something to the Beis Hamikdash, that goes to this Bedek Habayis fund. So the Bedek Habayis fund would go for the mizbeach of the korbanos and the offices and the courtyards. Chutz l'chamas hazara, except excuse me, chutz l'chamas azara, things in Yerushalayim but outside the azara, outside the walls of the courtyard, bar mishar halishkos. They came from the extra money the um of the lishkos, and the lishkos, what we said, came from the half shekels. Zuhi sheshaninu, and this last thing about outside Yerushalayim, outside the walls, is what we learned in a Mishnah. The walls of the city and its towers, which usually were for watches and for enemies, and all the needs of the city, come from the extra money of the lishka. That was what they would collect from the shekels every year. So the problem is that this brisa says that the klishares, the vessels for the Beis Hamikdash, were purchased with funds from the extra nesachim, but Rav says they were taken from the half shekels. That's what we saw at the end of last week. So this Mishnah, this brisa, and part of this brisa is in a Mishnah, is against Rav's opinion, and so really. Rav is considered Amora, but there's times Rav was an early Talmud of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. So sometimes Rav has the status of a Tana, and he's allowed to argue on a Mishnah. In this case, the Gemara is not going to give that as an answer. But here the Gemara is going to say Tanaihi. There is a machlokas Tanaim about this point. Did not, because we learned in the Mishnah in Shkalim. Moser Truma. So the extra of the half shekels, Mahayu Osnaba, what would they do with it? Rikuiz of Tzipur Leves Koche Kadashim. They would make a golden, like a gold plate as a covering to the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Rabbi Shmuel Omer Moser Peiros Lekei Mizbeach. Extra money from the fruits. Peiros means fruits. Lekei Mizbeach. That is. So this is the same. This seems to be the same thing we said before. The extra nesachim. So Rabbi Shmuel seems to call that the Moser Peiros. So that would go Kei Mizbeach is if there were times in the korbanos when no korbanos were being brought on the Beis Hamikdash, they would bring korbanos just so the Beis Hamikdash, just so the Mishkan would be in use. I mean, the Mizbeach should be in use. The Mizbeach shouldn't be sitting idly by. I mean, obviously there was a fire on it all the time, but if there were no other korbanos being brought, so from the Moser Peiros, which according we saw that it's machlokas, whether it's when people would bring the flour, it was heaping over the top of the kli, and they would flatten it off, and they would sell that extra, or it was if there was if the price went down after they put in their order for the year. Moser Truma, but if the extra of the half shekels lechlei sha'ares, they were used for vessels for the Beis Hamikdash. Rabbi Kiva says Moser Truma lekei mizbeach. If they had extra money from the half shekels, that went to bring extra korbanos so that the mizbeach wouldn't be empty. Moser nesachim lechlei sha'ares, and if you had extra from the nesachim, so nesachim and peiros, they seem to be talking the same thing, which we called it something else above. No, we called it Moser Nesachim above, and that would be for the Klei Shares. So Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Kiva's opinions are flipped. And Rabbi Chanina Sgan HaKohanim Omer Moser Nesachim Lekeitzim Mizbeach. Rabbi Chanina, the assistant of the Kohanim, said that the extra of Nesachim goes for this korbanos of the Mizbeach, which seems to be like Rabbi Shmuel. Moser, except he uses the term Moser Nesachim, whereas Rabbi Shmuel says Moser Peiros. Moser Truma Lechli Shares. And the extra of the Truma goes to the Klei Shares. So there's something very similar about Rabbi Shmuel's opinion, the second opinion in this brisa, or this Mishnah. It's a Mishnah in shkalim. So it's a Mishnah. So there's something very similar between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Chanina Skanakanim. V'zev Elohi Modim bePeiros. And Rabbi Kiva and Chanina Skanakanim did not agree about the Peiros. So now the Gemara is going to finally say, Peiros Mahi. What is this fruit money? Peiros literally means fruit. What's this Peiros that we're talking about? The Tana, because you learned in a Brisa, Moser Truma Mahi Osenbo. What would they do with extra half shekels? Lo compares bezol, they'd buy fruit at a cheap price, or produce at a cheap price. Umorchim so be and they would sell it for at a profit. And the profit they would make for it, then they would buy korbanos that would be brought when the mizbeach was otherwise idle, not being used for anything else. And this is what we learned in the Mishnah, Moser Peiros, Aketz HaMizbeach. So Moser Peiros seems to be that the Beis Hamikdash would do some type of futures trading over here and buy stuff at a cheaper price and sell it at a higher price. And Rashi points out that that was the profit. But what would they do with? So let's say they took $80, they bought some stuff, and now they sold it for $100. So for the difference, the $20 profit that they made, that would be the Ketz HaMizbeach. What would the original 80 be? So Rashi says that original 80, the principal that they had invested, and they made that back plus a little bit back, that would go to buy Kli Shares, or to fix or to buy new vessels for the Beis Hamikdash, as Rabbi Yishmael said.
According to Rabbi Akiva,
Yeah.
temple funds may not be used.
We have to read a little bit further. I think we didn't finish explaining all the opinions yet. So hopefully we'll explain that, or this my Zev Elohi and Modman Peros. So what? So on the top, on the second column on page 106b3, it says Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Chanina Skanakanim didn't agree about the Peros. So my Zev Elohi and Modman Peros. What exactly does that mean? What are they arguing about? Did not, because we learned in a Mishnah, Moser Sherei Halishka, the extra of the leftovers of the lishka, so that would be of the shkalim, I think. What would they do with it? They would buy wine and oil and fine flowers, and they would resell them. And so the extra money would be hektish. That would go to the Beis Hamikdash fund. Divrei Rabbi Shmuel, that's word of Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Kiva, hektish. Rabbi Kiva says we don't do business to try to make a profit with hektish property, af lo b'shalanim, and not with poor people's property. B'shal hektish my time alo. So why, according to Rabbi Akiva, do we not try to profit off, use the Beis Hamikdash and invest? Basically, we're trying to do, we could invest in something, buy certain merchandise with the hope to sell it at extra profit. So Rabbi Akiva says we don't use Beis Hamikdash money for that, and we don't use money of poor people for that, meaning the tzedakah fund. So why don't we do in the Beis Hamikdash ein anios b'makom ashirus? So as we turn to 106 before, in the place of rich, we don't act like poor people, meaning the Beis Hamikdash, there's plenty of Gemaras about certain things, about certain korbanos, certain clothing. The Beis Hamikdash was treated as like royalty. Does royalty skimp on things? No, they don't do things to save a nickel. So if the Beis Hamikdash would invest in these things to try to sell for a profit, that means like they're acting as if they need to make a profit. But if you're royalty, if you're that rich, you don't have to pretend that you need to make a profit. So just because you might have an opportunity to make this little business deal to make a little money, we don't do that, because that takes away the aura of royalty and fanciness that the Beis Hamikdash involves. B'shalani my time alone. And why don't we take the tzedakah fund for poor people? Why don't we make investments out of that? Dilma misrami luhu anya, because maybe that they'll find a poor person who needs money, and there's be nothing to give him because they invested it. So you can't invest tzedakah money because if it's invested, it's tied up in something, and we need it to be liquid at all times in case we need to, but they encounter a poor person and needs to give him money. So according to Rabbi Akiva, we don't deal with um, buying and selling extra stuff. Okay, so Marty, what did you want to ask?
No, you were,
Did we explain
had
it?
the different opinions, and then I read Rabbi Kiva there down there, you know, which kind of, I mean, it's not interest we're talking about.
No,
It's the whole thing, but
it's not interest, but the point is that should we make an investment
exactly, yeah,
to try to make more?
because it's questionable, and like you said, this
The
way
Gemara
for
doesn't,
money for the poor.
right? The question of the Gemara doesn't say, well, what happens if they end up losing money?
Yeah,
So I don't know. I mean, they would be making low risk investments. What exactly the risk is, I'm not sure. But now I don't know how this works in practice. I've read, not in halacha, but well, one was kind of, well, not really halacha books, but it seems that's, I don't remember where I read it, but uh, there was a story, a certain gemach that someone wanted to take a loan. So he asked someone, I'm making a wedding. Can I borrow some money for a gemach loan? And the guy says, he went to the person. The person says, I actually uh, gave money to this particular gemach society. So go talk to the head of that and tell him I sent you, and he'll lend you what you need. And so I don't understand the details here. So when this guy was able to pay back some of it, he didn't go back to the Gemach fund. He went back to the guy who he'd originally gone to. And long story short, it ended up that the administrator of that Gemach fund was doing something improper with the money, and this guy who had given money for the Gemach to lend out, somehow it all got lost except for the money that this guy paid back directly for him. So what exactly was going on there? I don't know. Something I don't understand, but something's missing from that, whatever. But I don't know if the money is and that I mean just a quick thing for what's in the news, the universities and their endowments. A university, well, is not a tzedakah fund, and it doesn't have to have so. But the thing is that 106b4. Um, if you have communal funds, I guess it's a bit of a shaila to investigate somewhat based on this Gemara. The could you invest with things? But nowadays, also normally, if you buy stocks or most mutual funds or ETFs, they're pretty liquid for the most part. If you need money, you could sell it. You might sell it at a loss, but it might take the end of the day. But they're usually pretty liquid. If you're buying, let's say, a property, that's going to be not liquid. So depending on the type of investment, it's fairly liquid, fairly not liquid. For the tzedakah fund, it seems wouldn't be able to invest any of it because it always needs to be in fully cash, 100% liquid in case the gabaim would see a poor person, they need the cash to give him or her money right away. Okay, so now we're starting a new sugya. And so the Mishnah said that if someone goes, and this was the machlokus between Admon and the Chachamim or Chanan, the Mishnah said on Kuf Daled Amud Beis, if someone went overseas and his wife is collecting mezonos, Chanan says she swears at the end if she's collecting the whole ksuva that we heard he died, but she doesn't have to collect money if she just wants mezonos. Um, and the Bnei Kohanim Gedolim argued and says if she wants to get money from his estate for food, she has to swear that she doesn't have money from him. And then if we hear that he died overseas, she has to swear again that she doesn't have money from him, and then she could collect the ksuva. So there's a big machlokas amoraim, which would severely potentially limit that din of the Mishnah. And that's what we're going to spend a long, well, hopefully we'll finish it today, but there's a long Gemara about this. Okay, so Mishalchem Dinasiyam. Itmar, we learned. Rav Amar, as we turn to Kuv Zayin Amar Aleph, Rav Amar poskim mezonos la'esha siish. Rav says that the Beis Din will go into this person's property and possibly sell some of his fields or whatever in order to provide for food for his wife. Ushmuel Amar ain't poskim mezonos la'esha siish. And Shmuel says the Beis Din will not provide food for a person, for a woman whose husband is alive but away. Amar Shmuel, Modali Abba. Shmuel says, but Abba agrees with me. So Abba is Rav, and it's a machlokas from other places. Some say that Rav's real name was Abba, but because he was such a big Talmid Chacham, they just called him Rav. Lahavdor of Yashaber, everyone called him the Rav. So this Rav Abba was so great, they just called him Rav. And some say that Shmuel learned so much from him, he called him Abba out of respect. So Amar Shmuel, Modali Abba b'shosha chachim harishonim l'fi she'ein adam meniach beis oreka. So Shmuel says that Beis Din doesn't. Shmuel says Beis Din will not take money from his estate or from his property. He's not dead yet, so I won't call it an estate. And Rav says they do. But Shmuel says that Rav agrees that in the first 3 months that someone leaves, Beis Din would not. Meaning, according to Rav's opinion, that in general Beis Din would go. Rav agrees that in the first 3 months that he left, the Beis Din is not able to sell any of his fields to give money to his wife because he's not going to go out of town without making some arrangements and leaving some money and funds available for her. So for 3 months they would. B'sheshamu bo shemeis, when they hear that the person died overseas, kuli amalo pligi, and everyone agree there's no machlokas. Shmuel and Rav both agree that the Beis Din will help sell off his property, or maybe make an apitropos, a trustee over it in order to deal with it, in order that the family will have food and eventually the sons will inherit it and it will be in a good custodianship. Ki pligi, when do Rav and Shmuel agree? Kishlo shambu bo shemes. If they didn't hear that he died. So he's been gone for a very long time, and no one heard he died. Rav Amar poskim to hamishubadlah. Rav says that the Beis Din will go and start selling part of his maybe part of his field, whatever, in order to the family should have money, because the husband is indebted to provide for his wife's food. Ushmuel Amar ain't poskin, and Shmuel says that Beis Din does not. My taima. What's the reason for Shmuel? Rav Zvid Amar imatzrari atvasa. Rav Zvid said the reason is they're worried that the Beis Din suspects that really he left piles of money or bundles of money for her, and so if Beis Din would sell it, it's really a double payment. Rav Papa Amar Cheshina Shema Amar La Tzima Seidach Mimzonosayach, and Rav Papa says the reason is, as we learned a while ago, that a husband is allowed to tell her wife, I'm not going to support you, and therefore I'm not going to take the wages you make. So the wages that you make, they won't go to me, and you could support yourself with those wages. My benaihu, what's the difference between these two reasons? Ika benaihu, gedola v'lo sapka. There's a case who the wife is a gedola, an adult, but she doesn't have such a great skill set and a great job, so her money won't cover the expenses that they're going to have. Inami ktana v'safka. Oh, so gedola v'lo safka, Rapapa's reason won't apply because the amount that she'll make with her wages won't cover her expenses. So Rapapa's reason wouldn't apply, but Rav Zvid's Amar that maybe he left money would apply. Inami, or a different nafkamina, would be Ktana v'safka. She's young, and she has a good job that she could provide for herself. So according to according to Rav Papa, her work would support her needs. So if he told her that, then it would be fine. But if she's a ketana, she wouldn't necessarily know what to do with the money. So if it's a ketana, according to Rav Zvid's reason, he wouldn't leave money for a ketana because she's young and doesn't really know what the money really is and how to really use it. Okay, so now the Gemara is gonna ask a lot of questions trying to disprove Shmuel, trying to prove from different Mishnahs and Brisas that when the husband goes overseas, the Beis Din is going to support his wife. He's going to sell some of his properties potentially in order to give money for food for his wife. And Shmuel is going to deflect most of those and say that those are cases where we heard that she died. And Shmuel agrees that if she dies, the Beis Din can go into his estate to pay off the ksuva. So that's we're going to spend a lot of questions back and forth now. So Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, Mish halach l'mdinas hayam v'ish devas mezonos chanan omer tishava b'sof lo tishava b'tchila. Someone who went overseas and his wife went to Beis Din demanding support that the food money for food. Chanan says she only has to swear at the end when she's seeking for the whole ksuva. Velo tishava b'tchila, but she doesn't have to swear at the beginning, but she's only asking for mezonos. So the Mishnah there says that Chanan holds that she could get money. And Bnei Kohanim Gedolim argued on Chanan, and they say she has to swear at the beginning and at the end. So both of them agree, though, that while she's only demanding money for food, that the Beis Din will give it to her. They're only arguing if she needs a shvua or not. But we see that both of those opinions in our Mishnah hold that the Beis Din will give her money for mezonos. Ad kan lo pligi inyan shvua. They're only arguing in regard to if she needs to take an oath that he didn't leave her anything in the meantime, and she needs the money for mezonos of a mezoni avin and but according to both of them, they agree that Beis Din will give her mezonos. So, and according to Shmuel, though, Beis Din never gives her mezonos. So our Mishnah seems to disprove Shmuel. So Shmuel explained that the Mishnah is talking about where we heard that he died, and so she's getting she's so so the question is, though, according to the Mishnah, it's pretty clear the Tchila and the Sof, there's a beginning and the end. So beginning must be before we heard he dies. So what does Shmuel do about that? So I don't know if she heard that so I don't know if she's asking for mezonos retroactively, because there's definitely there's two situations. What's the betchila and what's the sof? So if Shmuel says the Mishnah is talking about we heard he dies, why would you be swear for the earlier? What's the tchila, the beginning, and what's the sof, the end? Unless after he died, she's asking for retroactive mezonos. I don't know. Okay, Tashma. So now we're going to bring a brisa to try to disprove Shmuel. If a person traveled overseas and his wife is going to Beis Din demanding that they sell part of his property to give her food, Bnei Kohanim Gedolim Omer Tishava. The sons of the Kohanim Gedolim say she has to swear. Chanan Omer lo tishava, that she doesn't have to swear. This is very similar to our Mishnah. It's not exact same din as our Mishnah, but it's very similar. V'imbava Amar, but if the husband came back and said, Pasakti la mezonos, I gave her money for food, Neman, he is believed. So this is if he came back later. But if she didn't, again, Chanan and Bnei Kohanim Gedolim agree that the Beis Din would give her money. So Hachanami Ksheshama bo shemeis. Shmuel would also say this case is where they heard that he dies, and that's why the Beis Din is going to give her mezonos. So the Gemara asks a big question on here. But here the Gemara says if the husband later comes back and tells the Beis Din, I left her money, what's going on? So we see he didn't die. So the Gemara says, Imbala achar Shmuel. So if we heard that he died, but it ended up that the report we heard was wrong. We heard he died, and then he came back a few months later, or sooner than that, or later than that. Sometimes, here's the thing: it's hard. It's a little bit hard to understand, but well, I don't know. In those days, if someone went on a ship, and I mean, we know from Gemaras and stuff, someone came back and says that ship sunk. But how do they know they sunk? Were they also in the storm and they saw that ship sunk, but their ship didn't sink? So I don't know exactly how they would know these things. But there's a different situation that could have happened. The guy could have made it safely across, and he couldn't get sick. He could have gotten sick over there and died. And someone eventually is going to come back and say Shmuel got sick and died over there. Whatever it was, someone came and said he died, and then he came back later, so we know that the report we heard was wrong. So because we did receive a report that he died, Beis Din was starting to give mezonos, and or to pay the ksuva even, and but here in this case, it was lahavda, like Mark Twain. The reports of his death were greatly exaggerated. So that's a good question. So the Gemara, there's in the last two prakim of Yevamos, I think, talks about that in cases of real agona, where he's missing and this and that. So if so we're makel in a case like that one witness would be believed. Right, so we'd believe it. So if the halacha is if Beis Din, I haven't looked at it in a long time, so maybe I shouldn't say, but my recollection is that if she listened to if she listened to Beis Din, I think she'd have to divorce the second husband because it ends up that she couldn't be married because she was already married. Meaning there's a big machlokas in general between or it's an important machlokas between I think it's between the Avnei Miluim, who's the author of the Ketos HaChoshen, and Pnei Yoshua. And I'm not remembering it exactly right now. If you try to give to someone who's an Aisha Ish, someone who's already married, and you say Harayat Mikudeshesli, we know she's not married, but the question is why not? One of the opinion is she needs to be available. We call that having a yacht. And in this case, because she's already married, she's not available to receive kedushin from someone else. And I forgot what the other opinion is, but it might depend on that. But I think the halacha is that if Beis Din had allowed her paskin that she get remarried, she obviously isn't married to the second guy, and I think she can go back to the first husband. And if she got married herself without listening to Beis Din, I think she can't be married to either. She has to divorce the second one, and she can't be married to the first one either. I think I might be wrong, but that's what I recall. But don't paskin based on what I just said. Tashma. So here we have another brayso. So we're going to try to disprove Shmuel. A person went overseas and his wife is requesting from Beis Din that money for food from her husband's property. If he came back from overseas and he said, no, you could have taken your wages and bought your food with that, and I wasn't going to keep your wages. Kadmu Basin Pasku. If the basin had already paskined that they have to take, that they were going to sell part of his property for to in order to give him his mezonos, Masha Pasku Pasku, that which they decided still stands. So in this case, we see this brisa says that this wife is requesting mezonos. It doesn't say that he died. So hachanami b'kishamush bo shemeis. But again, here's a case where Shmuel says this is a case where um, she heard that we heard that he died, and therefore she was collecting mezonos. And again, the report of his death was greatly exaggerated. He was alive and he came back later. Now, one thing, so I said before, and I'm not by the first case, and I'm not positive about this, but the point is that if if he's dead, why was she collecting mezonos? So I said maybe she's collecting mezonos retroactively. There is another possibility. We learned earlier, and we actually had a similar thing recently, that just because her husband dies, she doesn't have to collect the ksuva. For she could keep getting mezonos and not collecting ksuva. We just saw the thing recently about the 25-year limit in some cases that she has 25 years to collect the ksuva. So it could be a case where even though we heard that he died, she didn't ask to collect the ksuva. She just wanted uh, to get mezonos. Maybe that's another possibility. So you might think, well, if he died, why isn't she collecting ksuva? Well, in other cases where he lived in town and she saw him die, we know that she didn't always demand the ksuva right away also. So maybe it could be a case again like that where she's asking mezonos for herself. She's still going to live in his house, but for whatever reason, she doesn't want to demand the whole ksuva yet. Tashma, where Kuv Zayin Amid Aleph, the last second to last narrow line, it's 107A2, the last few lines. Tashma, let's learn from this brisa against Shmuel. If a person went overseas and his wife is going to Beis Din, demanding that she get from her husband's property, she gets money for food. So we turn to 107A3. Based in Yorshin and Chasav Zanim Mufarnas and Leishto, Avalobana Avalobaros Avlo Davracher. Based in will go into his property and sell part of it, and they will give food and parnasa to his wife, but not to his sons and his daughters, and not something else either. So we'll talk about the other thing in a moment. Amr of Sheshas. Rav Shesha says that's not a question against Shmuel because b'mashra sishoy de shalish. This is a case where he appointed someone to be giving her money while he's gone. So that's why Beis Din won't, and I guess the case is where she's complaining that the Beis Din is not. It seems that Rashi's saying that he had appointed someone to give, and then this guy withdrew. He says, "I'm not dealing with this anymore." So what happens to her now? So Beis Din will sell part of his stuff or whatever or not sell, depending on the situations, in order to feed her. So that's the situation there, that there was he did appoint someone to be paying them while he was gone from his money, but that person either died or withdrew. So ihachi bana b'nos of nami. But so if so, why doesn't the Beis Din get money for the guy's kids, sons and daughters? Why only for the wife? So the Gemara says, he made some a trustee to pay his wife while he was gone for food, but didn't make a trustee to pay for the expenses of his sons and daughters. So the Gemara says, well, my pascha. If a guy was meticulous enough to appoint someone to keep sending money to his kids while he from his estate while he's gone, why wouldn't he do it for his wife and kid for his kids and sons and daughters? That really doesn't make sense. So Elam Rapapa gives a different explanation why this isn't a question to Shmuel. This is a case where we heard he died with only one witness. So what's the halacha in this case? He dibaisin suve be'ed achad matzim minasva. Because she, for her, only one witness is enough for her to declare that the husband is dead and she's allowed to get remarried. So she could get remarried. Mizoninami avinanla. So for her, we will give mizonos. But banu uvnosav the iboy lemechas and chasabeit echad lamatzu nachse. But if the sons and daughters want to get the Yerusha based on one witness saying that the husband died, that we don't allow. So that's a financial, meaning in regard to someone being alive or dead, in regard to getting to get married, I believe it is based on Eidach Neman Bisurin. Now it's true, Tosvos in several places, including on Daf, I think it's Vav, in Makos talks about that witnesses for a wedding should be very strict. It should be like Dine Nefashos. It should be like witnesses for a capital case. Because if people get married, if two people get married, a man and a woman get married, now the woman will be an Ashes Ish, and their other relatives to each other will be Arayos. So because the fact that they're now married, other people are liable to get a death penalty in case of certain actions. Tosfos mentions it should be stricter. But in regard to saying, oh, one witness said he's dead, now let's make a split up his estate for Yerusha. No, that's a monetary thing, and you definitely need two witnesses for to make monetary decisions. So because we don't think he's dead to split it up, so we are not able to give food to the sons and daughters either. So the Mishnah said, this Brisa said that the Beis Din will give money to his wife, but not to his kids, and not something else. So my davar acher, what is this something else that the Brisa was talking about that they don't give the wife? Rav Chisda Amar Tachshit, Rav Yosef Amar Tzedakah. Rav Chisda said Tachshit, which seems to mean perfume, and Rav Yosef says Tzedakah. So they don't give her money to give tzedakah with, and they don't give her money to buy perfume. Mand Amar Tachshit Kol Shekain Tzedakah. The opinion who says that she doesn't get perfumes, then she certainly wouldn't get money to give tzedakah either, because perfume, while it's not a staple, but we saw Gemaras about this earlier, but it is a common thing, and so it would be unseemly if she wouldn't have perfume. But obviously, perfume is more important than tzedakah. So if she doesn't get money for perfume, she certainly wouldn't get money to give tzedakah with. But the opinion who says that she doesn't get money for tzedakah, they would say that she does get money for perfume, because perfume is a much more important thing for her, that he wouldn't want her to be disgusting by not wearing perfume. Seems we spoke about this on Daf Memches Amud Aleph a while ago. Okay, Tashma, another brisa that we're going to try to say that Shmuel's wrong. Shlosha Chadashim Hayavama. So a woman whose husband died, and now she's waiting for Yibum or Chalitza from her husband's brother. Shlosha Chadashim Rishonim Nizonos V'Al Baila. For the first 3 months after her husband dies, so you can't do Yibum yet, because there's a halacha in the Gemara. You have to wait 3 months to make sure she's not pregnant from her husband. Now we know that that's true if someone was widowed in general or divorced. We want to make sure that if she would have a baby, we know who the father is. But Lamaisa, we mentioned that it's 94 days. So the Gemara says Shlosh Chadashim, but practically it means 94 days. So the Yavama for the first 3 months, they can't do Yibum because maybe she's pregnant and is going to have a baby from her husband, who is before he died, they conceived. Mikan va'elach, so the husband, her late husband's estate, will pay for her mezonos. Mikan va'elach eini nuzos lo mishal bayil lo mishal yava. But after the 3 months, she doesn't get money for food, not from her husband's estate and not from her brother-in-law's estate. Now we know that if he does do Yibam, the brother-in-law is going to inherit the brother's estate. We had a Gemara about that a couple weeks ago, um, where the woman had this collection paper from Basin because the guy was refusing to pay. So we learned a bit about that. Ahmad Bedinu Barach, if this brother went to do Yibum, went to Basin and he refused to do Yibum or Chalitza, and then he ran away, then he's mezonos mishal Yava. Then the woman will get mezonos from his estate. So this is a question against Shmuel because he ran away. We don't know where he is, and Basin is going to go into his property to give mezonos to the not yet wife. So Shmuel, so Shmuel would say to you that that's not a question. Why should we worry about this woman at all? If we're worried that he gave her money, bundles of money, well, he never was married to her. He the only connection is that his brother married her and his brother died without having children, so they have to do yibum. If he really would have cared about her, we know people might smuggle, you know, give bundles of money to the wife that we wouldn't know about. In this case, that didn't happen. They weren't married. He wasn't his wife. He's her brother-in-law who would have to do yibum or chalitza. So we're not worried that he gave her money. And if it's in regard to her wages, that he's relinquishing his rights over her wages so she could provide for herself, he doesn't get them in the first place. So in this case, so if we were at the beginning of the Gemara said on on the top of Kuf Zayin Abad Aleph, we had two opinions. Why is Shmuel's opinion say that the Beis Din wouldn't take money? Rav Zvid said maybe he left her bundles of money, and Rav Papa said maybe he said you could keep your own Ma'aseh. So in this case, he doesn't get Ma'aseh to begin with, and because he wasn't married to her, that he doesn't necessarily feel close, and he wouldn't have left her money. So in this case, Beis Din would uh could go into his property, but for a regular case of a wife and a husband, he wouldn't. You can't ask me a question from Yibum because Yibum is very significantly different from a regular uh, wife. Tashma, another bride we're asking against Shmuel. Haisha shahalcha hiu b'aglam sayam. A woman and her husband together went overseas. And then she came back. Uvasva amar meiz ba'ili. She came back and said, "My husband died." Ratsa nizones, ratsa govak tzuvasa. If she wants, she could only continue to take food from the money for food from the estate, and if she wants, she could collect the whole ksuva. Girshani bali, but if she came back and said, "My husband divorced me," so in the case of divorce, she doesn't get mezonos; she could only get full ksuva. Misperneses v'holechas agdei ksuvasa. In that case, if she's only taking money for food, once the money for food has reached the limit of her ksuva, then she doesn't get any more. So we saw a few prakim ago and stuff that if that a widow, if she doesn't move out of the house, she could keep getting money even above and beyond the value of the ksuva. So that's what's going on here. But in case where she's divorced, so that's if she's a widow. But if she's divorced, we're not going to let her get more than the value of the ksuva. So this last thing, if she got divorced, we don't have two witnesses that he died. We only have her saying it. So, so we wouldn't let her collect the ksuva because we don't have two regular witnesses to say, "Oh, this is a monetary case." We would take money out of his estate. But the Gemara says that we would feed her until the value of the ksuva would be of an amount equal to the ksuva has been spent on her. So we see that in this case, where he might be alive, but he might not be. We don't know we don't have a halachic determination of death in this case, but we allowed Beis Din to sell off some of his stuff to feed her. So that would be against Shmuel that we wouldn't, Beis Din wouldn't give her food, only for if case of death, they would give her mezonos. Now, here was a case of death, but halachically, we don't have two witnesses, so the Beis Din couldn't uh, monetarily, because also if the Beis Din would take the to pay the ksuva off, they might be stealing from the his heirs. Because if there's a Yerusha, which they're not allowed to take yet, from what we saw a few lines above, we don't know for sure that he died. But if Basin would give the wife and not the sons, then they might be stealing from the Yorshim also. So Shmuel would say in this case, Hachanami Kishema Bo Shemes. This is a case where he died. So it seems that she claimed that uh, that they were divorced, and then we heard that he died. But if we wouldn't have heard that he died, Beis Din, according to Shmuel, Beis Din would not sell off a field of his to pay her. Um, the article in footnote 16 says that witnesses report that her husband died before she claimed that she got divorced. So it could be a different answer. Okay. Umayshna ad kedek suva. So in that case, how come we only pay her until the value of her ksuva and not more? So the Gemara says, she brought the loss on herself because she could have made a better claim. She could have said that he died. The fact that she said that she's divorced, we'll only give her what she's entitled to based on the claim that she makes. Tashma, let's again ask a question on Shmuel from another brisa. So remember, Mema'enes is a case where she was younger than 12 and her father died. So if her father was alive, Midiaraisa, he's allowed to marry her off to who he wants. But he's dead, and the brother and the mother married her off to someone. So that marriage does not have any effect Midiaraisa. It only has effect Midirabanan. And therefore, if she says, I don't want to be married to this guy, uh, the wedding is retroactively annulled. She doesn't need a get. She considers it was a full annulment. So that's what a case of Mima'enes. She refuses to stay with him, but the wedding was never a Midi Raisa wedding because her father had died, and the father didn't marry her off. So when do we say that a Mima'enes doesn't receive food? You can't say that it's where she's still living with her husband. Because her husband would obligated to feed her. It must be a case where the husband went overseas. So she borrowed money to feed herself. She used that money up, and then she nullified the marriage. She annulled the marriage by saying, "I don't want to be married to him anymore." So taima demiana. So the reason in this case that she doesn't get mezonos is because she refused to stay in the marriage. Hello miana, but if she wouldn't have, yavinanla, Beis Din would feed her, or would sell part of the husband's property to feed her. And according to Shmuel, Beis Din would never, while the husband is alive, Beis Din would never feed her. So that's a question against Shmuel. So Amilcha Shmuel would tell you, Hachalamai nechushla. Why are you asking about this particular case? Imishum tsrari, if it's because she would have bundles of money that the husband left to her, tsrari like tanalomatfis. This is similar to what we said before. You wouldn't leave money to a katana. She's not old enough and mature enough to know what to do with the money. The imishum asyadeha, and if in regard to the fact that maybe the husband said he didn't leave her money and said any money that you make, you could buy. I'm not going to take it. You can buy your own food with it. Katana lo safka. But this katana is probably not going to be able to do enough work that she'll be able to pay um, for her own food. Now, a few questions above. Right at the beginning, where we had the machlokes between Rav Papi and Rav Zvid, we said an Nafkamina was a case where there was a katana who was able to support herself. So that was a theoretical possibility. And from this Gemara, we seem to be saying that practically it's unlikely that a katana would be able to have a good enough job to support herself. Okay, so my Havi Allah, how do we paskin? Literally, what did we have on this? But it means, how do we paskin? Do we paskin like Shmuel or do we paskin like Rav? Kiyas Rav Dimi Amar, when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, he said, there was a shiloh like this that came in front of Rabbi in Beis Sharim, where the woman was collecting mezonos, upasuk mezonos, and Rabbi paskined that the Beis Din will sell part of her husband's field and give her food. Lifnei Rabbi Shmuel b'Tzipori, there was a similar shiloh in front of Rabbi Shmuel in Tzipori, in a different city, v'lo pasuk mezonos, and Rabbi Shmuel did not passing like that. So it seems that Rabbi is passing like Rav, and Rabbi Shmuel passing like Shmuel. Now, obviously, Rav and Shmuel are a generation later, but it seems the machlokas about what Rav and Shmuel were arguing about was already a machlokas tanai. So Taiba Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan had a big question about what he didn't agree with what Rav Dimi says. To he, it's like a tema, big question. The chima ra Rabbi Shmuel shlapasuk lemazonos. Why would Rabbi Shmuel not give her food? In our Mishnah, Bnei the Kohanim Gadol and Chanan both agree that she gets parnasa, the food. The only thing that they argue about is does she need to take a shavua or not. But they all agree that we get that the Beis Din would give her money from the husband's property. Amarli Rav Shimon bar Abba. Rav Shimon bar Abba said to Rav Yochanan, Kvar Tigmer Rabbeinu Shmuel b'Vavel. Our master Shmuel in Bavel already explained this Mishnah that they heard that this husband died, and therefore the Beis Din is giving him. Amarle Pesurinhu lo Kuli Hai. Rabbi Yochanan says he explained it to such an extent, it seems to be a big stretch to explain our Mishnah that way. Kiyasa Ravin Amar, when Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael, he said the same thing but flipped. The Shaila came in front of Rabbi and Beis Sharim, and Rabbi says she does not get mezonos from the husband's property. And they also had the same Shaila to Rabbi Shmuel and Tzipori, and he paskin that he does get mezonos. The opposite of how we paskin before. Tail Am Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, Mara Rabbi Shla Pasakla. What did Rabbi see that he didn't give her food? The halonachlu kuchanav bnei kohanim gedolim el in shvua. In our Mishnah, Chanan and bnei kohanim gedolim only argued if she needed to take a shvua or not to get the mezonos of a mezonos yavinanla. But according to both of them, they would give her mezonos. So Amalei Rav Shimon bar Abba. Rav Shimon bar Abba said to Rabbi Yochanan, "Kvar tigim Shmuel b'Vavel." Shmuel already explained it in Bavel kishashama bo shemeis, that the Mishnah is talking about where they heard that he died. Amarle Rabbi Yochanan said to Rav Shimon bar Abba, Pasrinu Lukuli, how did he explain it that much? Meaning it seems to be too big of a stretch. The Hilchasa Kavase de Rav. And we paskin like Rav, that Beis Din will give her food. So the whole amud and a half that we just spent, even though we didn't disprove Shmuel, we don't paskin like Shmuel. Now, if we didn't disprove Shmuel, why didn't? Now, it could be because Rabbi Yochanan clearly disagrees with Shmuel's. Rabbi Yochanan disagrees with Shmuel's interpretation, and Rabbi Yochanan is someone we usually paskin like. Maybe that's part of the reason why. And we pass in accordance with Rav that even when she's still, we know that her husband is still alive, Beis Din will either put a lien on his property or perhaps sell part of his property in order to give her mezonos. Let's just try to finish to the Mishnah. There's a couple other things that the Gemara paskins right here. We also paskin Rav Huna Amarav, the Amar Rav Huna Amarav. Yechola isha shetamar lebayla eini nizonos ve'eini yosef. We saw this a while ago. A woman is allowed to say, "You don't have to feed me, and I'm not going to work." The Hilchos Kavasi Rav Zvid b'Kunya, and we also paskin like Rav Zvid with Kunya. So Kunya is earthenware glass vessels that are coated with lead. Rashi here, Opheris, and we have Opheris in the Az Yashir, that the Egyptians sink like lead. Lead is very dense, so it sinks right down. But what's interesting, the old French word is plombier, and we know that the Latin word for lead, and I think in Hebrew it's a similar thing, the Yiddish word for lead is plumba. They used to put a plumba, a lead staple, on the chickens, and that's called a plumba because it was made from lead. And Dr. Fensterheim's grandfather died from blood poisoning. He got stuck by one of these lead plumbas, and he got lead poisoning and died from it. But the word plumba, but in the periodic table, lead is PB. For the same word, the Old French, and I guess the Latin and the Yiddish, and I think the Hebrew also. And but I'm not sure about modern Hebrew, but I think in English we don't call it a word that has PB, but the Old French, what?
Yeah, we do.
Like what?
Plumb bob.
In English?
Yep.
Oh, we call it lead
Plumb
though.
bob in construction. Guys use a plumb bob.
But that's like on a plumb line. Oh, so that was a piece of lead.
At the end of
Okay,
the line.
okay. But it's indirectly referring to lead. Okay, but you're saying it still is in English. Okay. So because it was coated with lead, we're saying so the Amar Rav Zvid, Rav Zvid said, Hani mani dukunya, these glazed vessels, chivra v'ukme sharu. If they're white and black, you're allowed to use them. Because they're saying that even though they're earthenware, if earthenware would you would cook treif in them, earthenware vessels cannot be kosher because the stuff could get all the way in and we can never get it out. But if it's glazed with the white or black, we hold that the glaze is strong enough that the stuff can't penetrate the glaze. And anyway, if it's lead is a type of metal. You can kosher metal. So we don't care that there's earthenware underneath it because the outer layer is metal, a certain type of metal, and you can kosher that. Yeruke asiri, but if it's green, it's usher. You can't kosher it. Rashi says because there's some aluminum in there, and I think it's aluminum. He says alum, which I think is aluminum also. But that is not as good of a coating, and stuff could get through there, and you're not able to kosher it. V'lo amran el delesbu kartufne. And when did we say that you could kosher the ones that are white and black? That's if they have no cracks. Aval isbu kartufne asiri. But even if they're white or black, but they have cracks, you can't kosher it because the stuff through the crack in the aluminum coating, I mean in the lead coating, it went into the earthenware, and we can't kosher earthenware. So this very last halacha has nothing to do with what we were talking about, but probably one day they were giving over psakim and they mentioned these three things together. So because we mentioned for our sugya, we mentioned that also. Okay, we better go to mincha. We got to the Mishnah.